Can you hear me at the back there? Yeah, okay, that's good. Right, I've got some hymn sheets here which I'm going to hand out. We'll all want one each, so could you pass them around for me, please, before we start? What I want to talk to you, first of all, is about the art of making talismans and their usefulness and what they can do and what they can't do. We're also going to be making a talisman each of the sun with, you've got a design on there, which I've taken from Agrippa, it's on page 1. We're going to be etching that, or rather you all will be etching that on a piece of on a brass disc. We brought all this. So there's going to be one. So we'll take you through it. You'll all be doing one, and brought all the etching fluid that you'll need and everything. And while we'll polish it up. And then once you've all got your disc, we're going to use the symbol. In a meditation exercise, and we will afterwards consecrate it and charge it up. And so you'll have something to take home with you and be good. So, whilst originally I did think about bringing the contents of a temple down here and setting something up and put it on a big production, I quickly realised that it wasn't really going to work out really like that, which is a bit of a shame really, but so I thought really, let's do something simple and try and keep it all together, because it's going to be complicated enough as it is. When we get round to the consecration, what we're going to do is put all the chairs back, and we'll have everybody in a big circle, and we'll have a table in the middle as a little altar, and we'll work from there. So then you'll all be standing up then with your disc, and we'll have a team of people over the back that all come round, one with the water that you can dip it in to cleanse it, another one with the incense that you can hold your talisman in, and another one with sacred oil, which is based on the formula I found in the Old Testament, so that you can consecrate it. And you all have some wording to say. We'll all say it together. The first, if you look on page 1, we've got a Latin invocation of the sun, taken from the Heptameron. I put the English translation on page 2, because it's always useful to know what it is that you are saying. And I did have the idea that we could all say it all together, the Latin one. So we'll have a run through that later on. So we can divide it up into a couple of 3 parts of the workshop. We'll have a break at some point, so everybody can do what they need to do and what have you. So, and then we'll have Ben's tincture, which we'll put in the middle of the room at the end of it, and we'll do some visualization, some chanting in a big circle, and we'll all be firing it up for it. So we've got quite a bit of stuff to get through, so I think we better roll with it all. Talismans. Well, talismans are different from amulets. Amulets are something really that ward off things, you know, like people, bad luck, the lucky rabbit's foot, and the horseshoe. You can see those as as amulets. Talismans are something completely different. They are made for a specific reason. They can be made out of metal, they can be made out of paper, or parchment, gemstones. They'll always have a particular design on them. They will be consecrated and dedicated to a particular purpose. They can take on a life of their own. Often they'll need recharging because they don't last forever. You can keep them going. We'll run through some of these ideas shortly. They are useful, and I've seen some interesting results with some. I've known some not to work. I've known some to work spectacularly. In an old group that I was in, I've known people to be cursed with them, and a lot of bad stuff happened. I also know a lot of good stuff that's happened. So I don't personally draw any distinction between the morality in magic. I leave everybody else to make up their own mind what they want to do. It's not my place. My original teacher, when I was a child, in my teen years, when I said to her about ethics, she sat down with a very large glass of wine, which was the second glass of the wine in the morning, and she said to me, ethics, she said, is the county next door to Suffolk. And that was the end of the conversation. It was never mentioned again. So, to draw a conclusion from that, ethics and morality, that's for the individual. It's not my place to go around saying to people what they can and cannot do. There's a lot of bad things in the world, and I often think there's not much point actually adding to it, really. But I don't see these things as black and white, personally, because there's all manner of currents that are flowing through creation, and we're a part of that expression. I mean, we tend to have an attitude, and I'm as bad as everybody else, that the universe runs around them, and that they're the centre of it. They might be the centre of their own universe, but they're not actually the centre of the universe, you know. It's not the universe's business to make everything happy for you. I mean, our wants and changes, our wants and needs change, don't they? So, you know, be careful what you work for, because if you ever get it, you may not want it. It's always a point to take on board. And the second point I want to bring to your attention is, you're not God, so you're trying to bend the bendable, and there'll be some things that you can't bend. So that's always a point to take on board. Of course, people get involved with concepts of karma and things, and they worry about their actions and stuff. Well, you know, really at the end of the day, the concept of karma entered the Western magical tradition, well, in the English-speaking world, really after Blavatsky and Mathers and the unfortunate and all the rest of it. Prior in the early English days, there was always that concept of weird, of fate. But we seem to have got rather quite confused and almost this obscure, well, absurd Christian morality that's sort of crept in. You're responsible for your own actions, nobody else is. I'm not responsible for what you do any more than what you're responsible for what I do. And each and every one of us will develop our own morality based on our own understanding of the universe and our place within it. And it's the individual's responsibility. Part of being an individual, if you like, and to move away from the herd mentality. So you are individuals in your own right, and you must bear that one in mind. So, morality side of magical working is over. Talismans can be consecrated by a variety of means. You can, of course, make planetary talismans, or talismans or specifics based on a seal of a spirit. So if you've seen Key of Solomon and various other works, the Goetia and what have you. And you can place it in the triangle of art, and you can put on the big production. I quite like these big productions, they're quite dramatic really, well they can be. You can certainly, I can say, charge it, fire it up through such a work. But to work at that level is quite demanding, and there's a lot of other disciplines that become involved with it all. So, you know, is it necessary? I'd say yes and no. It will work, and they are quite a thing to see, but they're not actually that necessary. You can charge the talisman up simply by Barden's work in his initiation into Hermetics. A book, if you don't know it, I thoroughly recommend that you get. It's one that should be on every magical worker's bookshelf. He has some brilliant techniques in there for working with, and quite a training manual in its own right. Basically, in a lot of his work, he'll have you endeavouring to put your consciousness into an object and pulling in the life force of creation to pump it up and charge it up. That's a nice word. You can adapt it to working with elemental material. It's a process that you can do sitting on a chair there. You don't need to have, lots of stuff happening, big magical productions. You can just sit there quietly, working with it in your hand. It's quite a nice way to work. Often it'll want repeating to charge it up. One method I came across, which I haven't tried so far, which I quite like the idea of, and it was some French Martinist material I came across. It was a working, I think it was in the 1940s when this was written up. And basically what these people were doing, they'd make their talisman in the planetary hour. And we touched upon planetary hours and planetary days yesterday, which we'll go into shortly. And basically what they were doing, when the planetary hour came round, they took it out of its silk wrapping, silk being considered a magical insulator, and they left it on the side to soak up the magical vibe of the hour. And at the end of the magical hour, they covered it back up. And they do this several times, and then declare that it was charged. And I thought, that was quite a simple way of doing things, really, and the chappie writing the article was quite clear how, whilst it was a simple idea, actually worked very well. And it's not one that I've done, but I think it's worth considering. But to finesse it a little bit, as somebody who likes to overcomplicate things, I'd be more inclined to have burning, should we say, a candle of the appropriate colour for the planet that you're working with. Perhaps some of the planetary incense. Perhaps just reading a planetary invocation as you hold the talisman in the rising incense smoke. And then putting it on side and letting it wait for the hour to finish and then wrapping it back up. That's how I personally would approach that, and I think it's quite a nice gentle approach, which is well within the range of everybody without having to have, as I say, great temples and spending months getting kit together and learning formula and all the rest of it. So I'm beginning to find quite an appealing idea, because it's all very well putting on big magical productions and having them being successful. We also ought to be able to cope quite easily with smaller productions, like the ones I just said. And the older I'm getting, I find that small productions are going to have a bit more of appeal. You have to do less demanding in many respects. So that's a method to take on board. Now, there are a variety of magical seals that you can find out there in Grimwater. Say, I mentioned two. What's become known as the Greater Key of Solomon that Mather's produced, and the Lesser Key that David Rankin and Stephen Skinner produced. The Veritable Key of Solomon, which if you haven't got is worth your time considering acquiring, because there's a lot of useful information in there. And basically, as I understand it, they drew on various Solomonic manuscripts in various archives to try and produce a definitive Key of Solomon, and done a very good job of it. As also with the Goetia, the Lesser Key. You can see the way these grimoires have developed out of one another. There's a lot of material from an older grimoire, the Heptameron, which was written, I suspect, sometime around the back end of the 1200s. Or I don't know that, but it's very Catholic in its approach. Whereas the two Solomon ones that I just mentioned, there's no Christianity in it. It's quite Jewish in many respects. It'll use a lot of psalms. So there is this development of grimoire material. You can trace where it comes out of one and out of another, and you can trace a lot of them, as Stephen Skinner's quite clearly pointed out, amongst others, back down to Greek texts from 2,000 years ago. So there's been this tradition of working with this material for a very long time, which in its own way builds up its own energy behind it. What I was going to say now is about the timing of making seals. We look at a lot of magic books and they make big deals, as I said, about planetary hours, planetary days. Planetary hours are quite easy to work out and they are worth taking on board. You can get lots of programs off the internet. The Cronus XP one is quite an easy one to download, and it'll tell you planetary hours of the day and a flick of a mouse. It's quite an easy one to work with. Planetary days, I suggested I'm not a great fan of them, but they do have a they are used by people, of course. So if you wanted to work with the planetary day, say you're making a Jupiter talisman, then obviously you'd be working on Thursday in the hour of Jupiter. That's how books that you'll read about talismans will have you work with them. Myself, I much prefer to use the astrological art. I'm quite keen on astrology, and it's something that seems to be missing from a lot of magical workings, really. And go back to French Martinists, there was a line in a book I wanted to read, I couldn't find the damn thing, so we'll try, it doesn't really matter, but I'll manage without it. But Pappas, who published, well actually, there's a reproduction of this book that you may find interesting. I'll pass it around if anybody wants to take the title off it. Somebody's published this book based on some material that Pappas had used with the Martinist orders in France. And he's quite big on astrology in there, and he says a lot of the things that I've already been saying, so I thought him and I would make good mates, really. But he points out quite clearly the use of astrology within making talismans, and to take particular notes, as I've said to you before, about where the moon is. Go back to Beyond Fortune, Mystical Kabbalah, and indeed in her novel Moon Magic, she talks about how the moon rules its own kingdom, the kingdom of ebb and flow, and how she is the mistress of all magic. Now she's good, Beyond Fortune, with the material that she produces, a bit moralistic really, but she doesn't really give you any how-to instructions. She's left all this stuff out. But if you take that as a hint, then the best thing to do, as it occurred to me a long, long time ago, and this chappie Pappas confirmed on where my thinking was, to observe where the moon is in relation to the planet that you want to work with. So, if you want to work, say, with Jupiter, for example, I'd be inclined to see that the moon is making a good aspect to Jupiter. Bear in mind that the moon will move all the way around the zodiac within the month, well, 9 days really. So at some point we'll be making bad aspects in opposition, or squares, so they're 90 degrees apart. The ones that you want are the sextile, where they're 60 degrees apart, or the trines, which are 120 degrees apart. Those are the optimum times, and because the moon will take 2.5 days to move through the sign, she's moving at about half a degree, or just a little bit more than that, to the hour. So she'll be making a good aspect to the planet you want to work with a couple of times a month. That would be the time I would go with it, and that would be the day, not necessarily be the planetary today, but that would be the day I would go with and work out the best planetary hour that suits me on that particular day. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Yeah, good. Curiously, I thought originally when this idea was bounced about back in the winter, and Ben said it was going to be this weekend, and about doing this solar work today, I thought about it a bit afterwards, and I thought, well, that's quite interesting, because today the moon is running through Leo, solar sign, and here we are doing solar work. Mm-hmm. So that sort of worked out quite nicely, really. Because my next point, if I wanted to raise with you, If you can't work out the moon making a good aspect to the planet, or there isn't time, there's something else happening, it's pressing or whatever, then another option to work astrologically would be when the moon goes through a sign that the planet rules. So if we're working in, say, with Jupiter, the signs in the zodiac Jupiter rules as Sagittarius and Pisces. So if the moon is running through one of those, that would be also a good time to work with the Jupiterian current. So if you want to work with a martial current, then it'd be when the moon's running through Aries or Scorpio.
Karen, just let me know, the ascendant's just got into the video as well, and the view's just got into the
Nice to know.
Yeah.
Oh, is it? Right, there you go. Synchronicity to make it happen. So the current's flowing with us, folks. You often get a lot of synchronicity with magic. Synchronicity is, Jung says, meaningful coincidence. A lot of stuff's always happening. And it's a good sign, because once you've got it happening, it's showing you that you're plugged into the current and it's all flowing in the right direction. And you're on the right track. And I quite like that. So stuff like that just indicates that we're all meant to be here today, folks, doing this work, and the universe is with us. However, you okay? Good, okay. Okay, good. So, if we've now picked the right time, and we've got, we worked out the astrology of the working, and we worked out our day, we worked out our hour, if you like, how are we going to charge our talent? Well, I'll briefly run a few ideas past you. And what I want to use for you today is based on Rigardi's middle pillar. You're all familiar with that? Some of you are, some of you aren't. Okay, I've got to say a few words about that. Rigardi popularized an exercise, a magical exercise called the middle pillar. It's based on the Kabbalistic tree of life, which should be behind me. Yeah. And you can develop this into quite a complex exercise, but we're not going to do that today. Basically, you're starting up here, visualizing Keter, the sphere up here, and then there'll be a god name that is intoned. Imagine that you're actually in the Sephira. Okay, and I'll talk you all through this later. And you're bringing the light down to your throat where there's another ball of light, and there'll be another name that's pronounced while you're there. Try to visualize that you're actually in it, you're endeavoring to connect with it. And you're bringing it down to solar plexus and repeating it there, down to the genital region, repeating it there, and down to the bottom of your feet. And then you're back up the top here, and as you breathe in, the light travels down that side, and as you breathe out, it comes back up this side. We can do that 3 times, 3 circuits if you like, and then the same going down the front and back up the back. This is an exercise that we've developed into building up the whole tree in the aura. Which is quite a useful exercise, but that's not for us today. So once we've done that, we'll be sounding, if you like, as a mantra, the name, the god name of Tiferet, because it's the Sephira that the sun equates with. And then once we've built that up, that'll be the moment when we pour all that energy into the talisman that you're all holding in your hand. This is something that we repeated on a regular basis, so to keep it sort of going. This particular talisman, well, I thought really that if we're making a solar talisman, those lines from Doreen Valiente jumped into my head, you know, about health, wealth, strength, and the joyous spirit. And I thought, yeah, that's a nice thing, so that's what we're going to make our talismans all for. So I thought that'll go with everybody. So health, wealth, strength, and the joy of spirit. It should be on your hymn sheet somewhere. That's going to be what we're working with our seals today. You can't have enough of that. It's a good one. Means to making talismans. These ones are going to be etched on brass today. So they're going to be long-lasting. Pappas goes on to point out, incidentally, that talismans that have been created when the moon is favouring a planet that you're working with are the better ones because the energies last longer. Whereas he says if you're working on a planetary day process, he suggests they don't last much more than a month. But I do know that they do need regularly recharging in some way. They don't run out. It's not like the Duracell bunny that keeps going. So bear that in mind. You could have your talismans, shall we say, in little pots that are once a month. You can charge up holding an incense and reciting a little invocation, reminding them what they're supposed to be doing for you, and firing them off like that. You know, not exactly your best friends, but part of your team, if you like. Working with planets and planetary talismans. One thing that's never comes over, and I've come to realise that this is quite important, is the planetary seals. You've got the one there of the sun. Well, Agrippa gives in his book the seals for the 7 planets. Now, what I'm trying to say is, at some point in your medical career, I think it's a good idea to spend some time visualising that seal. You can make your own little mini planetary ritual and visualising that seal, and imagine that you're walking into it. There's like a doorway, like you can do with tarot cards and Hebrew letters on the tree, and endeavouring to connect with the planetary current, and it will manifest at its own terms, at its own level. And this is a work I've never seen anybody talk about. And I think rather it's a good thing to do because it's almost like introducing you to the energy. You're trying to build an emotional response to it. You see what I mean? Which is why I don't really get on with terminology using Christian terms within magic because I don't really feel any connection to it personally. I quite like the iconography of it all, but I don't really, Jesus doesn't do anything for me really. But within the Grimoire traditions, he gets called upon quite a lot. You think of Honorius Grimoire, and as I say, the Heptameron and Grimoire Verum and what have you, which is why I quite like what's become known as the Lesser and the Greater Key of Solomon, because they don't do the Jesus thing. And if Jesus means something to you, then by all means work with current, but if it doesn't, then there's no point really, because you're not getting that emotional connection. You see what I mean? There's that emotional connection that you need to build up, which is why it's very good, in my view, to work with the tree here if you want to work with talismans and spirits and magic in Western tradition. Some authorities have sneered it a little bit, but that's neither here nor there. It's a roadmap, if you like, in your psyche, and it will help to make those emotional connections to sounds, symbols and colours and planetary energies. So I think it's a good thing really. Spent perhaps 12 months working with some of the materials from meditation and path working. It's path working and it's path work. You know, you have this new age approach where someone's reading something out, you know, it's quite meaningless dribble that you're all walking on the beach and the sun's shining and friendly dolphins drop wave back. It's great stuff, I've got nothing, you know, but it's not really going to go anywhere. Whereas if you're working with the Kabbalistic stuff and you're building up these doorways, so I've just given you about working with the seals, but if you're building up doorways based on the tarot cards that go onto the path, or the imagery of the Sephirah, or in the Hebrew letters, and you build them up doorways and you're walking into them. You are experiencing that at a completely different level. In fact, the ones on the lightning path that comes down like that, you'll find much more powerful. And often, in my own experience, you'll find the themes that you've come across while you've been at this level, themes that you come across, stuff that happen, will be reflected in your own life in the next few days until you get on to doing the next one. I've often found that happen. And we're again showing you you're plugging into the current, really. But I think it's a good idea to work with this material because, you know, it's developing powers of self-discipline, powers of concentration, powers of willpower. All these things you'll need to work successful magic. So your magical toolbox should contain the most important magical tool that you've got, and that is your willpower. Doesn't matter, you can have as many wands you want to buy off Glastonbury High Street, that's neither here nor there. You have a whole forest that you've cut down from out the wood. But really, at the end of the day, one tool that you really do need, and it's your most sacred tool, is your willpower. And so, anything that develops willpower has got to be good. You know, setting yourself, if you like, a meditation task in the sense of spending half an hour a day doing something, building up willpower. Going without something for, say, 100 days, if you like, won't be easy in some cases, helps to build up willpower. Keeping your word when you say you're going to do something, which is all can actually be quite difficult because the universe can quite conspire against you, and you know, there's not a lot you can do about that one. But endeavouring to keep to your word, even when it's inconvenient and you don't want to be bothered. You shouldn't give your word lightly, because it becomes a magical act. Mm-hmm. Anything that undermines that will and that belief in yourself is fatal to your magic and developing that magical current within you. So, you know, your willpower is actually your most sacred magical tool. And such an attitude, as it develops in you, spills out over to other areas within your everyday life. So, you know, it's an alchemical approach of its own, really. It's creating transmutation. So, if we have developed our willpower, and if we developed our belief in ourselves sufficiently, can we make our magic work every time? Magic won't work every time. Perhaps it's just as well that it doesn't work every time. As I said earlier, you're trying to bend the bendable. Not everything can be, how can I say, can be brought into manifestation. I mean, to do that, you're going to have to be God. We're on our way, but we're not there yet. Basically, what I wanted to say to you was that thoughts and emotions have their own energy. And it's working with our thoughts and emotions and channeling their energies into that which we want to consecrate, which is part of our magic. Now, in the magical worldview, that which is in creation is also reflected in us. And that we are part of the great scheme of things, if you like. So, by plugging into that current that is within us, of the Pacific energy, say, like today with the sun, we can connect with the bigger worldview of it. You see what I mean? Like doorways into other levels. Because other levels of existence certainly exist beyond the everyday, and that is something that you must never doubt. Because that is true. Mm-hmm. And in time, you don't simply just have to take my word for it, you can experience these levels for yourself. And then that'll be your own personal knowledge. You see, because at the end of the day, belief, if you like, is for those who don't work magic. Knowledge and experience are for those who do work magic. See, the man of religion will believe in God, but the magician will know God. Because you are the people having the magical experience, the intimate one-to-one. When something happens that you know couldn't possibly have happened, you're having a demonstration given to you personally of another level of existence beyond the everyday. And it gives you a bigger view, if you like, of creation, and indeed your place within it. And that, I think, really is probably one of the more important aspects of magic, which doesn't really come over a great deal. You know, it's great being able to change situations in your favour. I'm all for that. But really, at the end of the day, the very fact that, you know, you've done it, teamed up your team universe, it's happened. It's also demonstrating to you that there are, as I say, levels of existence beyond the everyday, and that you're actually part of it. And that, I find, is really, in many respects, one of the bigger gifts of magic, really. You could argue that it's also probably one of the more important ones too. So, if we're going to make talismans, as I mentioned earlier on, by using brass over here, and I did say to you about using paper, parchment, gemstones. If you go back to here Solomon, they have the tool burin for engraving. Well, I got a little one that you stick a battery in for engraving from a little hardware shop, which you can consecrate, and you've got a little burin that does it rather quite well. But it's best to draw the design first and then go over that, because you'll make mistakes and make a mess of it. Well, I did the first couple of times, so something occurs to me, well, then I draw the damn thing first. Experience is also a great teacher. Franz Barden, in his, like I mentioned earlier, in Initiation to Hermetics, comes out with this substance, this creation called fluid condenser, which he makes out of various herbs. And he's suggesting that these hold magical charges, pretty much like a battery does, holds energy. And if you were working with, say, drawing a talisman on paper, you could soak the paper in one of these fluid condensers first and let it dry, and then draw your design on it. Or you could put the 3 or 4 drops of it in your ink or paint or whatever it is you're using, and use that to draw your design. These are quite interesting things to work with. Many years ago, my original teacher was working with a Venusian spirit, and she told me that she was endeavouring to get this Venusian spirit to manifest within the triangle of art, and she used one of Barden's fluid condensers, soaked it on some blotting paper and drew the seal on it and put it in the triangle of art. And she said, whilst there wasn't a manifestation and that which she wanted to happen did happen, the talisman turned bright green, which of course is the colour of Venus. She used to keep it as a bookmark for years, but you know, the thing is with magic, things do happen. So I'm quite keen on Barden's fluid condensers, and they're a useful magical aid, and they're quite straightforward to make, although you can make them quite complex by pulling in alchemical techniques and workings. But Barden makes them quite easily, really, with a saucepan on the stove, so it's quite an easy thing to do, really. And it's worth you all doing it. If you're going to engrave a talisman, then you really do need to draw it first, really, before you go over with an engraving tool, you know, a felt pen or pencil or something if you can. Ideal for working on a gemstone. You know, the idea of having a gemstone on a ring and having a little simple design on it would work quite well with that. In many respects, you're limited by your imagination. That is one of the things with magic. You're limited by your imagination. So if you can expand your imagination, you can expand your field of operation. And in my own experience, I've found that if you're working with material and you're plugged into the current of it, often you will come across other sources of information that will either confirm or tie in with that which you want to do. And as time goes by, you're starting to build your own system. And that, I think, is quite a good thing, really. You know, you become quite individualised within a framework within the Western magical tradition. You know, you can adapt bits out of, say, Levi's elemental prayers and elemental rituals, and you can pull bits out from here and perhaps a few lines from a psalm there, and suddenly you're creating your own magical ritual. It's quite unique, really, and that's actually part of the magical current too. So, I think the best thing we can do now is probably get on with something etching. Now, what we're going to do, we brought all the brass discs, we brought over the etching pens, and we brought over the etching fluid. This fluid's quite caustic, so you don't want to get it on your body, certainly not near anything that's sensitive. Try not to spill it. We've got it all in jars with lids, so we're trying to cut down on spills or anybody trying to sue me afterwards. Rather soon Ben, but I mean...
I'll be out there firing.
He's off to Australia, he's responsible.
Can I just say, I put the lids on so that they're just turned tight, they're not very tight, but they should be loose fibres.
Jackie's topped all the jars up for you. But I'll explain the process. You've all got a gripper's design on page 1. You all take it in turns with your brass disc to draw the design as best you can. Anybody's got a problem with it, then we'll think of something. Don't worry, improvise. Once you've got your design, you put it in one of those jars. We put some fluid condenser in it. We put some etching fluid in it, and we'll leave it for about 40 minutes, 45 minutes. Then we're going to pour it off, and you'll have a black outline of the talisman, which will wash off in some water. And we'll get a piece of fine steel wool, and you can polish it up, and it'll come out really nice. Just make sure that when you put it in the etching fluid, the design's facing up, not facing down. Point to remember. And then once we've got it, you're all going to have your talisman, and then we'll go into the second part about consecration. We'll go over some ideas then about it, and we'll... Sorry? Put a label on it, good thinking. You might want to put a label on your jar with your name on it so you don't lose it. You know. Which is relevant to what we're doing today, is what Dion Fortune said. I found a good paper. In her book Applied Magic and Aspects of Occultism, Dion Fortune says, when our emotions go out strongly towards an object, we are pouring out a subtle but nonetheless potent form of force. The outpouring force is formulated into a thought form. The mental picture is ensouled by the outpoured force and becomes an actuality upon the astral levels. Each symbol upon the tree represents a cosmic factor or force. When the mind concentrates upon it, it comes into touch with that force. A channel in consciousness has been made between the consciousness and the mind of the individual, and a particular factor in the world of soul. This results in a tremendous access of energy to that individual soul, and it is this which endows it with magical power. So, as I said earlier, to access these magical levels, we talked about willpower, concentration. Power to concentration must be developed. You must be able to focus intently for, well, how long's a piece of string, for the length of time necessary. Concentration is not an easy thing, as is visualization, but we've all got these abilities and they can all be developed. Some people are going to be better at it than others. That is always the way. But that which we do have as individuals, we can develop. And if we do develop our concentration and our visualization, then we will find that our magic becomes more successful. And you might think, well, why is this? Well, it's quite simple, really. What you are doing is building up forms on the subtle levels, which can then be ensouled by an incoming force. What you have here is a piece of brass with a design on it. But symbols are alive at their own levels, and they exist, well, as I say, on the subtle levels. But this is the outer form. What we need to do is ensoul it so it becomes a living object. And to do that, this is where we're going to use consecration. As I said earlier on this morning, it can be a complex operation or it can be a simple operation. And we're going to do something relatively quite simple. So, building up these forms on the subtle level is what we need the powers of visualization for. To clearly visualize an outcome, or to visualize a symbol, if you like, that represents an outcome. Bear in mind that Jung in his psychology and his ideas, he talks about basically how symbols are the language of the unconscious mind. Well, he unfortunately relates the unconscious mind to the levels of Yesod on the second Sephira on going up on the tree there. It's got number 9 on it, it's purple. And from there, it becomes a gateway to the realms beyond. So, symbols, if you like, can be seen as doorways to other levels. And symbols that are emotionally charged and emotionally driven become powerful symbols. We can see that with politics and religion. And if they've been around for a long time, they'll acquire life of their own. And this is a symbol that you have here today that Agrippa produced back in the early part of the 1500s. I don't know where he got it from, but as I say, it's been around for a long time. Now, I briefly want to talk to you a little bit about magical squares. On page 2 of the hymn sheet, on the bottom you'll see a square, 36 numbers. Yeah, you with me? That is the solar square. Each planet will have, they're called cameos, each planet has a different one. If you take Saturn, it's made up of 9 squares, 3 by 3. Jupiter's made up of 60, and 4 by 4. And Mars is 5 by 5, so that's 25 squares, and so on all the way down to lunar square, which is 9 by 9, so it'll be 81 numbers. This is the solar one that has 36 numbers because you've got a square, 36 squares. 6 one way, 6 the other. They should all add up to the same number if you add them across the page. It's quite a clever trick, these. What they are used for is for drawing sigils to go onto talismans and magical workings. Now, yesterday David touched upon, remember when we put the numbers 1 to 9, and then we put all the letters underneath it. And so, like, a letter would have a number. Remember that? We touched upon that yesterday. We should have got a whiteboard really, and then we could have written it out there and showed you a bit more, but it doesn't really matter. It's all in Liber Noctis, which Sarita's selling, so you can find it over there. If you turn and you say, for example, your name into numbers and trace those numbers out on one of these squares, then you'll have a particular design which you could then trace onto a talisman relating to that square. So if it was a solar square, which you all got there, if you turned your name, say, into these particular numbers that I mentioned, and then trace the numbers out on there, you'll have a particular pattern, and then you could draw that on your disc to make your talisman. And that would be a personal talisman relating to you, locking your name into that particular current. So if you're using a solar square, it would be with a solar current. Of course, you could do any other planet that you wanted with its own square. But we did need I could write all the numbers out, but we pretend when I've done that, we've moved on. No, it doesn't matter, Ben.
Really sure?
Yeah.
Because I've got the slide here if you want me to bring it up.
No, we're all right.
Okay.
We're all right. But that's that is what these squares are all about. I want to bring to your attention regarding his book, How to Make and Use Talismans. He covers this quite extensively in his book, what I've just said. Basically, it's a slimmed down version of the Golden Dawn material, and he did publish some of their material, like geomantic divination, in these little slim books. It came out about 1970, so it's been around for a long time. This particular one belonged to the group that I was originally in Shropshire. So it's quite an old version now. I think there are more modern ones around that are in better condition. It's just had a hard-working life, I'm afraid. It's falling apart a bit. But it's one book to look out for. What we're going to do now, I think it's going to be a good idea now if we pop the seals in the etching fluid, because they've all got to go in at the same time, so because we've got to time them for about 40 minutes. And then I think after that, we'll put the chairs in a circle in a minute or two, and we'll get on with the next bit of practical stuff that we're going to do. So if you want to come up here, get one of these jars. You've got the fluid in. When you put your disc in, make sure the design's facing upwards. And then put the lid on and take it back to your seat and hold on to it.
We've been covering.
You didn't come with it again.
What are we going to do now? Because we're going to leave these etching now for about another half hour. And what we're going to do with this magical work with the sign that you've all got there. John is going to do the left band or the pentagram, which is Golden Dawn ritual, although some of it you can see in some of Levi's writings, you can see where the idea came from. Basically, it's a basic ritual to help clear an area or an individual and the space around the individual so that they can get on with their magic unimpeded. And a place like this where a lot of stuff I think it would be quite a good idea to work there. So I'm assuming that East is up here.
Maybe with the doors. Maybe
Well,
with the doors.
So
Maybe with the doors.
East is there.
Yeah.
East is there.
Yeah. According to the
Oh, right, okay, we'll try to you.
Technology to the rescue.
Right, okay, so if that's east, that's direction on the
Yeah,
face.
his compass is
Maybe for the Cupid's arm and the leg or whatever.
You can pretty much use the door.
Okay, yeah, we're aiming that way.
It's an inch of the width.
So, I'll need to turn some of this stuff. Having done that, it adds up something extra at a psychic level. Ben's tincture, and I'm sure it will be better for it. Of course, if it was done again, done another time, repetition keeps building up the energy within it. Rather like somebody who wants to knock a nail into a piece of wood. You're not going to do it in one blow, but tap, 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 and you'll drive it through. So repetition is a good thing in magic. Doing things in groups of 3, groups of 9, 3 times 3, helps to drive the intent into manifestation. So, in some sense, you could say that you couldn't consecrate something enough. I suppose it blew up but regular work, regular attention will help keep it topped up and charged up. Now, what are we going to do now is get back to our talismans. I'm hoping, the older I'm getting, the more I have to wear glasses. Right. We should be coming up somewhere about right. This is fresh etching fluid, so it should be quite strong. If you use it 2 or 3 times to get it heat up. If it's warmed up, it'll etch a lot quicker. You've probably done this in about a quarter of an hour. But I think we've probably left this in long enough now. So what we're now going to do, we're going to pour the etching fluid off back into the bottle, and then the talisman, which will be in there, you're going to throw it into a bottle of water so it will wash off any residue, and you can get it out, dry it off, and you can polish it up with a very fine piece of wire wool. The finer the wire wool, the better, is what we need. It'll come out with black lines still on it, don't be put off by that. But we polish it up as fast as we can, and it will come on nice and then we'll go into the last bit of the workshop this morning, consecration and the charging of talisman. Keep polishing it.
Yeah, result.
One talisman.
Master Alchemist.
Each ball banging.
Ja dan, uit je kant. Even goed